Well, welcome once again to the Old Cow Report. Of course, I'm your host, Chuck Lee, and as usual with me is my rusty, trusty sidekick, Fred, the Truth Stafford. Glad to see you with us tonight, Freddie boy. Glad to see you here, and I noticed you got a nice new fancy T-shirt on there.
Yes.
See if we can spread that out. What's that say on there now? It says Tommy Thompson for Governor, 98.
Yes.
It's a pretty fancy shirt there, too. So
Yes.
the governor wanted you to wear that, Fred, so it's
Yes.
a good thing you're wearing that tonight.
Yes.
So, good job there. Of course, I've got the official Tommy Thompson baseball cap there. It says Tommy for Governor in 1998. And of course, we're both fans of the governor. He signed some controversial bills into law here recently. He kind of bit the bullet and finally did it on that. With abortion and a few other taking the lead on it. Well, boy, oh boy, Fred, as usual, we got a lot to talk about. You know it?
Yes.
If it ain't one thing, it's another out there. We got the old cow. They've got the old cow here, that the animated cow that will sing a song, and we captured that over at Common's house in his backyard. He's running around out there, and knowing Common, he doesn't like to feed animals, so we rescued it from his backyard and fed it, and now it's going to be on the show there to play music. Of course, as always, you have Common's head here he's loaned us, and we're trying to carry on the Common tradition since he quit doing his show. So we got his head now, and we've taken one of his cows that he was letting starve out there in the backyard. So we're fixed here now. We got all the cows we need, and everything's ready to go, and the set's as beautiful as ever, and we're coming to you live from a hot July 6, 1998. Just celebrated the big 4th of July weekend. And on a sad note tonight, we hold our program. As you know, our pyrotechnical engineer, Roy Rogers Hoff, named after one of the icons of the motion picture business and one of the icons, country and western icons in the country, from the silver screen, and then from his TV show in the early 50s and middle 50s, and his rusty, trusty sidekick, Gabby Hayes, and his other sidekick, Dale Evans. We're talking about Roy Rogers today,
Yes.
Fred, and
I know.
I know you used to go to every one of his movies back in
I saw
back in the 30s, was it? Did you used to go see the movies at the theaters? Roy Rogers, Dale Evans movies?
I went in the 20s more.
Okay.
I saw some of them in the 20s.
Now, do you remember did you ever go to the silent movies? Of course, you were born in what, 1917?
Yes.
They still had the silent movies back then?
Yes.
Some of the favorites back then, I suppose, were that little guy, Charlie Chaplin.
He was one, yeah.
But I think Roy came in during the 30s when they went into the talkies. And he became America's hero by saving people, and his sidekick, Gabby Hayes. But Roy Rogers Hoff, named after him when he was just a little child. His father named him Roy Rogers Hoff Sr. Now, I don't know if Roy's carried on the tradition with his son or not. We'll have to find that out later. But in the meantime, boy, oh boy, Freddie boy, do we have a lot to talk about, as usual here. And looking over the article here off the internet on Roy Rogers, the thing was 5 pages long, and I didn't want to print that much out, but it says here, Fred, that he landed a $75 a week job in 1937 as a singing cowboy at Hollywood's Republic Studios. Armed with a guitar, 6 shooters, good looks, and charm, Rogers rose in salary and popularity to King of the Cowboys from 1943 to 1954. He was the #1 box office attraction. And then he went on to a TV show from 51 to 57, Fred. Now, do you remember the TV show? Did you have a TV back then?
Yes, but I didn't watch much TV then.
Well, I was growing up back there in the 50s, so I remember Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and Trigger, the horse, and Bullet, the dog. And I guess I remember Gabby Hayes, but I guess that was he wasn't the sidekick on the TV show. They had a different guy for that. Okay, well, Freddie boy, so Roy Rogers is gone at age
Yes.
86. I just saw Dale Evans on TV a couple weeks ago, and she was singing some songs, and she's in a wheelchair now, confined to a wheelchair, but she still can sing, and she
Yes.
said that Dale couldn't be with her that night. This was about 2 weeks ago on a local, or not a local, but a TV show on the local cable system, and she sang a couple nice songs and said that Roy said to say hi to everyone, but I guess he was failing then. All right, Freddie boy, well, we got, as usual, we have a lot to talk about, and we're going to let you, before we take our first call, we're going to let you bring up the first item of discussion for the evening, other than Roy dying.
The Amato pushes for a vote on gay nominee for envoy. Senate criticized GOP leader's stance. In an unusually deep, sharp rebuke of his party, Senator Alfred G. D'Amato said today, urged the Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott to allow a vote on the nomination of James C. Barnett for ambassador to Luxembourg.
Huh. So in everyday language, what's all that mean, Fred?
Well, Trent Lott hasn't allowed the vote on that yet.
So he's holding it up, and D'Amato's saying he wants them to go ahead and have a vote
Yes.
before they have their recess. And we're talking about James C. Hormel as ambassador to Luxembourg.
Right.
He's related to the Hormels that own the Hormel
Yes.
a packing company over in, what is it, Austin, Minnesota?
I guess so.
They had a long, drawn-out strike there that really caused a lot of hard feelings. I think it was back in the 80s. He's the heir to that, those millions. Okay, Freddie boy, well, while people are digesting that, you know, I was in the store last night looking at some Hormel products. They don't even keep that stuff in the refrigerator department anymore. It was just hanging out on a rack there that said expiration date October, and there it was, some pepperoni to put on pizzas, and it wasn't even being refrigerated. I kept looking on there to see if it had been irradiated, because they have a process now where they can irradiate foods with radiation, and it preserves them to the point where you don't even have to put them in a refrigerator. But I couldn't find it on there anyway, so Fred, if they're doing it, they're just doing it and they're not telling the consumers, because there that meat was just hanging on a rack like any other dry goods. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, first of all, I'd like to say I'm a huge Freddie Boy fan, and I was wondering why you're wearing those blue glasses like that, or blue nose.
Well, as you know, it's summertime, and people that get out in the sun that have a fair skin, they have to have ways of protecting their skin from the effects of the sun. And you know, nowadays, sun cancer or skin cancer from the sun is getting to be a pretty serious problem. So a friend of mine invented these glasses here that they're called blue blockers, and that's why they're blue. And they block the rays, those blue ultraviolet rays that come from the sun, and the blue in the here blocks that, so that you can protect your nose and your upper face from...
Where can I purchase those?
I think they're down at the corner of Menominee Street and Ferry Street down there. You can get them, and they're sitting right next to the bottles of Flavin Pop down there. And of course, it's one of those new items that the Flavin Company adds once in a while. And you can get these for $19.95 down there at the corner of Ferry Street and Menominee. Fred, would you like to sing the Flavin Pop song tonight?
Absolutely not.
All right. Well,
Does Freddie Boy wear those glasses too?
Fred,
No.
do you have a pair?
No.
Well, you better get down there to that store down there.
Go get some, Freddie Boy.
No, I'm not going
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks for calling in. Okay, so as usual, you know, the show is brought to you by the fine folks at Flavin, and they've been making Flavin Pop now for what, 90, 95 years, Fred? Somewhere
to.
along
I
there?
don't know.
They came into Eau Claire from the old country, and they, up there on the north side of Eau Claire, they found a spring up there about 100, 150 years ago, and Mr. Flavin from the old company said, well, let's start making our own beverage. so they called it Flavin' Pop. And it's been a staple around Eau Claire now for, what, 90, 95 years, something like that? There was only a few places you could ever get it, and it's kind of has a long checkered history. One of the first uses for Flavin' Pop was...
Is it at the Undertaker's and...
That's right. A guy found out that he was going to a funeral one day and he ran out of gas. And so he walked up to that store up there at the corner of Ferry and Menominee Street, and they just happened to have a bottle of Flavin' Pop.
And
not only was he thirsty...
That store isn't there anymore, you know.
Not only was he thirsty, Fred, but he needed something to get the car back into town, so... the store was closed at the time, Fred, but they had a pop machine, so they bought a bottle of Flavin' Pop, and he drank it on the way back to his car, drank part of it, and he said, well, I'm going to just experiment. So he took the other part of it, and he poured it right in the gas tank. And that car started up, and he got 43 miles to the gallon that day. And he's been putting that in his car as an additive ever since.
Yeah.
But that was one of the uses. And then the funeral parlors locally started stocking it for the funerals, and the people would drink it. And one night the guy at the funeral parlor there was embalming a body, and he ran out of embalming fluid, and he said, well, let's try some Flavin' Pop in there. So he put the Flavin' Pop right in the veins there of the person, and 23 years later they dug that body up, Fred, and it was perfectly preserved from the Flavin' Pop. So not only do they use it as an embalming fluid, but they sell it at every funeral home locally here now as a beverage. So it has many uses, as a gasoline additive, as a beverage, and as a embalming fluid. So there you have the story of Flavin' Pop. It's been around for many, many years in the Eau Claire area. It's one of those local icons, Fred, for tourists when they come into town.
Yes.
They go to the local funeral homes to get their bottle of Flavin' Pop. Well, I think we had a call on line 37 there, and Roy there is handling the phones, and we have the chorus line of a bevy of beauties in there to answer the phone. And so if you want to call in tonight, the number is 839-6261. And before we get to Fred's next article there, we'll take a call. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
I have...
Hello? What do you got there, Roy? Was that a modem coming in? You're going to have to tell the boys out there to turn their modems off. Okay. All right, Fred, some news locally here that has kind of been disturbing. It's been hitting the local media, TV and radio and newspapers. Was another baby died here recently, or died in the last, yesterday, Sunday morning. This one was 11 months old, and the mother has been charged with, I think, was it second-degree homicide or something? This article here came out of the Leader Telegram, but it was before she was actually charged at the courthouse. But anyway, a local woman's been charged with the drowning death of her 11-month-old child. So we have another tragedy here in town with a young infant. Do you have any comments on that, Fred?
Well, that's too bad.
Okay, we've got a caller now. I got the modems hooked up. Okay, go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, I have a two-part question for you. One, do you guys receive any state or local funding for this show? And two, do you like your hot cow soupy or chunky?
Okay, well, as far as the local funding, we do have a federal grant from the Department of Education, and we have been designated as the only educational program in the Eau Claire area that actually tells the truth. It is not considered a left-wing radical outfit, Fred. We do try and promote good television here at Public Access, and with that federal grant from the Department of Education, we are very helpful to the local citizens here in Eau Claire to get the truth out, because all the other programs, TV, radio, newspaper, everything else in this area is censored by the leftists. And as you know, we were preempted here a couple of weeks ago by the local Communist Youth League that had their national convention here in the Public Access studios. And I think later we'll try and bring up a photo of all the people that attended that meeting there. But I think, Roy, we lost some of our lighting in here, overhead lighting here too. So Roy Rogers Hoff will be taking care of that. And, okay, Fred, well, we dealt with those two issues. Now, what do you got there about Oliver North?
Well, he's the founder and honorary chairman of this organization. And he goes on to say that because Clinton and Gore open arms policy towards Red China's helping this communist superpower establish a military and economic bulwark on the tragic area of American soil. And he gave the Reds in China the former U.S. naval station at Long Beach to Costco, a Red Chinese government-owned shipping company, giving the communists a perfect base for operations from which to loot our technology and spy on our military bases. Also, surrendering crucial port facilities on both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific sides of the Panama Canal to a communist Chinese-owned company.
Well, that's amazing, Fred. How did them Chinese get down in there anyway, in the Panama?
Well, they rented us.
I thought
that was with our approval.
Well, now, the true history of the Panama Canal, the United States bought a piece of land from Colombia.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with Panama. It was Colombian-owned property, and we paid dearly for it, and then we went down there and we dug ourselves a trench.
Yes.
It's totally owned by the United States. But over the years, we've had a bunch of liberal presidents that have wimped out, and they've given away this concession and that concession to the point now where we're actually going to give the whole shooting match away here in about a year. And I guess the commies are already moving in, the communist Red Chinese already moving in there, and they've got control at one end of the Panama Canal.
Both ends.
Well, both ends, but you know, the younger generations don't realize how important it is to have control of both seas in a wartime. And those older people out there that are watching tonight remember when Pearl Harbor happened and we had our Pacific fleet pretty much wiped out. We had to rely on the Atlantic fleet being able to go through the Panama Canal and kind of protect both our west coast and our east coast and our southern parts of the country.
Yes.
But China could easily close off both ends of that Panama Canal or sink several ships in there. It would take us months to get that thing back in order. And plus, we'd have to probably blast the Chinese out of there to get back control of it.
Yes.
So thanks to Jimmy Carter, who ramrodded through the Panama Canal Treaty, which handed over control to Panama, and we've got ourselves in a soup there now, Freddie boy.
I know.
Our fleet is split in two. The only other option we have now is to go around the southern part of South America, which adds several days onto the transport from the Pacific to the Atlantic. All right, now, Fred, something else we haven't mentioned here lately. I get out of the way. There's the Loyal Order of the Raccoons, Fred. Now, a lot of you out there have not renewed your dues for 1998 for the Loyal Order of the Raccoon. So, we want you to send in your 1995 as soon as possible so you can get renewed to the Loyal Order of Raccoons and you get your certificate and all of your other benefits. Fred, can you tell the viewers some of the benefits of belonging to the Loyal Order of the Raccoon?
I don't know them.
Well, I know we added a new gift this year for those of you that renew. We have the carp sausage king of the Midwest, Fred the True Stafford.
Not me. I don't have anything.
Giving a 5-pound section.
I'm not doing anything like that.
Licorice flavored carp sausage this year with every renewal. So don't forget to renew your membership to the Loyal Order of the Raccoons as soon as possible.
Yeah, pay it to Chuck. That's the one who gets
the sooner the better. And I hear you're coming out with a new flavor.
No, I'm not coming out with anything.
The flavor of the month club here. Last month it was strawberry flavored carp sausage.
It was, huh?
The month before that was licorice, and then the month before that you rolled out the original carp sausage. I don't know what flavor that was. I wasn't in the markets very long. And of course, You can get that right alongside the Flamin' Pop and the blue blocker sun blocking glasses. And now we've added and of course the new sign out that says Fred Stafford, the carp sausage king of the Midwest.
Yeah.
And how much is a 5-pound block of that stuff now down there?
$100.
All right, there you have it. So if you join up and renew your membership for the Loyal Order of the Raccoons, now you can get quite a discount, because it's normally $100 for a 5-pound block of carp sausage, and this month only, if you rejoin the Loyal Order of the Raccoons, you get it for $19.95.
Yeah.
Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I got a question. How are you guys doing tonight?
Fine, how are you?
Excellent, excellent. I'm a long-time viewer, first-time caller.
Well, good.
The reason I wanted to call was I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and I have been for about 10 years now. And just as of recently, I've seen a real upswing in the number of students that have been experimenting regularly with marijuana. And as a matter of fact, I often see them actually come into my class while being high. And I've tried to maintain a liberal view on the topic. I've been doing a lot of research. And a lot of students have talked in class about the legalization of marijuana. And I was just wondering if you think it would ever be a possibility of something like this going through in a state like Wisconsin.
Well, so you're a professor at the university. Does it affect their ability to learn and to retain knowledge and to on testing or anything? Have you seen where it has affected any of their performance?
To tell you the honest to God truth, at first I was real skeptical about the issue, and I've been kind of educated through my students. And at first I thought obviously it would have an adverse effect on their education, but as time's gone by, they've proven me wrong, and it actually, as a matter of fact, has not seemed to affect and sometimes increases conversation and discussion level in class.
Well, I know as far as the state of Wisconsin testing is done, they've added that to the list of things that you can be charged with as far as being intoxicated while you're driving.
Correct.
No longer is it just alcohol, but they also have, you could be charged with marijuana intoxication or any other drug that is going to impair your ability to drive on the state's.
Right, but what about in more social settings, not necessarily driving, as with any controlled substance, there would be legality problems as far as operating heavy machinery and vehicles?
Me personally, I don't think that we should be able to have a third major drug that is legalized that is causing problems. And so maybe your students are saying that it doesn't cause problems, but there are some scientific studies that say that it does impair your thought processes, your ability to retain knowledge, affects operation of machinery like driving cars. It does alter your state of consciousness. It alters your ability to do a lot of things in a what we call a normal way. Right now we have alcohol, which is legal and which causes thousands of deaths just on the highways alone. I think it causes 30 or 40,000 deaths a year. We've got alcohol. We got tobacco that's causing between 300,000 and 400,000 deaths a year. I don't know if we need another legal drug thrown into the mix or not. What do you think, Fred?
Well, I'll tell you what, I really don't know. I myself, when I was in college, experimented for a short time with marijuana. I'm much older now, and obviously it doesn't affect me. But from my own personal experience, I didn't see too many side effects, or at least the side effects that many of the literature these days and television shows and etc. talks about on a regular basis.
How long ago were you indulging in it, though?
Not very long. Just there was a short span for maybe 6 months or so.
I mean, you said you smoked it earlier, like 10 years ago or 20 or?
Oh, we're looking at about 15 to 20 years ago.
Okay, well, I guess marijuana that's on the streets nowadays is like 5, 10, 15 times as strong as what you were using back then.
Is that a fact?
And they've learned how to crossbreed it and whatever, but they brought the THC content up so strong now that it is a hallucinogenic.
How do you feel about other parts of the world that have had success with legalization of marijuana?
I don't know, name me one.
Well, I know there's many parts of Europe where, there's a couple places in Europe where it is fully legal, and there's other places in Europe where it is not considered an act to possess or smoke marijuana.
I think Alaska had an experiment with that. I don't know if it's still in effect or not.
Really?
But,
Has there been many auto accidents due to it in Alaska?
I don't know. I haven't been up there lately, but there's not much driving going on up there in the wintertime, but I don't know. But I know that...
Maybe some accidents with sled dogs?
Yeah. I'm sure that there have been some negative effects of the legalization in the European countries. I know some countries have experimented with loosening the reins on heroin and handing out needles and stuff, and they've had skyrocketing rates of people getting addicted now to heroin.
Right.
That's a different drug, but
Yeah.
when you loosen up the reins of these drugs, then the masses get a hold of them, and all of a sudden you do have some serious problems crop up. And we, getting off the subject of marijuana, we do have now a heroin epidemic going on in this country again, where a lot of the young kids are experimenting with heroin and all of a sudden waking up and they're addicted to that. And
well, some literature that I recently read talking about the legalization of marijuana talked about how if they legalize it and have it available at public stores, that will take the black market away from the industry and will not allow people to be subject to harder drugs such as heroin that they would be subject to if they dealt with black market dealers.
whether it's black market or if it's legalized, it's still the same drug that's getting into the hands of people, and it's going to cause social problems, whether it's legalized or not legalized. And our illustrious leaders in this country and most of the states and local governments have decided to keep it illegal, knowing the problems we have with the other drugs that we have legalized. And maybe there's a difference between legalizing it and decriminalizing it.
Correct.
So that we don't fill up our prisons with people that are experimenting or using marijuana. I'm sure we could use that prison space for better things.
Yes.
But maybe we can, maybe the governments should start looking at ways of decriminalizing.
They start off on marijuana and go on to other drugs that are stronger.
Yeah.
That's one of the bad things about marijuana.
Well, I remember as a young child experimenting with cigarettes and moving on from there to beer and other things. So.
But do you think that's from the cigarette that leads to the beer? Do you think that's a normal progression in your life where you're looking for experimentation? And a lot of times people experiment with these things and realize that that's not the thing for them, and so that they cut off those things. It's not a constant add-on process. For if it were, the entire United States would probably be full of heroin addicts at this time.
Well, I don't know. Fred came from New York City where there was marijuana all the way back into the 30s, and you saw some of them.
That's in the 50s.
I believe it was legalized till 1938.
What did you see with marijuana back east, Fred?
Well, I know that one time we were going to a meeting and stopped for a red light, and a gal come over to the car and asked if we had any marijuana.
That was back in the 50s?
That was in the 50s.
What'd you tell her?
No.
Well, there you have it, caller. I rest my case. Fred said no. That's probably what we should say. Just like Ronald Reagan's wife used to say when he was in office and she had the Just Say No program, the answer was just say no. So we want to say no to legalizing marijuana, but I'm sure we could free up a lot of law enforcement. And it irks me too. I've seen for years now the law enforcement, the sheriff's departments that have their annual marijuana bust. They go out and find some ditchweed, and they take a picture of a sheriff standing next to a pile of pot that they're burning, or they found 500 pounds of this pot or 500 of that, and they get their picture in the paper, and they get reelected, and it's been used as kind of a show thing every summer in probably every state in the union, where they've been able to get their picture in the paper standing next to the marijuana plants that they found. And I think we could free up that law enforcement use for better things, like solving unsolved murders and rapes and people kicking indoors and beating each other up and drive-by shootings. I think we could free up a lot of that that's used on the on the trail of all these hardened marijuana users out there, and possibly we should go in the direction of decriminalizing and freeing up some of that law enforcement for other areas of need. Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
That fucking nose.
Well, there's another fine example of the Eau Claire school system at work, Fred, that perfect English that they've learned from the local school system here. We have a new, it reminded me of, we have a new school superintendent now. Hopefully he's going to start some speech classes in the high schools where the kids, once they get into high school, they can learn proper English. You'd think by the time they got there and then they graduate that they would be able to speak English. But as you heard just then, they still haven't had the proper training of English going through the school systems locally to where they can get out into the workforce and speak English. And another thing they haven't learned in the local schools is how to add, Fred. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Go into a local fast food restaurant. I won't mention any by name because they always get mad at me when I say that, but it's pretty much across the board, any of them. And the cash register breaks down, or you give them a $100 bill, and all of a sudden you see panic on their face. First thing they do is they start looking for a calculator. The second thing they do is they start looking for a manager that can add and subtract. And it's a pretty sad state of situation there where they've let the calculator become the brain. And we're going to be switching over to one of the sharpest calculated minds in the area. And he'll be talking to us about some of what's happening on Mars and the moon probes and the Japanese sending up their own satellite that I think was orbiting around the moon lately. And that's Norbert Wilson. He'll be talking to us about the latest information from Mars here and from NASA in the next few minutes. In the meantime, we've got another call coming in here, Fred, but what do you have there next on your agenda to talk about?
California House race leaves passionate centrists behind. And the man that won the race was Tom Rordanero, and he won it, but he won the race, and he was a pro-life, he didn't stand for abortion.
That's great. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I was just, wondering, I was just going to have a comment that, over 10,000 years, nobody has died of a pot overdose, and then drinking. How many people die a day compared to the 10,000 years?
Okay, first of all, you got your facts wrong. The Earth has only been here about 6,900 years, so you're off there by 3,000 years. Better make sure I have my own math right. With this civilization's only been here about 7,000 years. So you got to go back to school, and that's another thing we're going to have to talk to that new superintendent about, is about history, about introducing some Christian education into the public school system, Fred. It's not illegal. The Constitution talks about not establishing a state-run religion in the United States. It didn't say anything about not being able to have Christian education in the public school systems. Most of your schools to begin with did have Christian education. If we could put more of that in there, we wouldn't have kids calling up here telling us about what happened 10,000 years ago when there was no such thing as 10,000 years ago. All right, before we get the next call here, the imperial presidency. President Clinton is to govern by executive order, Fred. He plans to bypass Congress with a blitz of unilateral actions. This is an article by Joseph Farah from the WorldNet Daily. President Clinton, who has issued far more sweeping executive orders than any of his recent predecessors, plans a new blitz during the next few weeks in an effort to bypass Congress with a bold and questionably constitutional lawmaking strategy. His first unilateral strike in the new campaign came ironically on Independence Day. He announced in his weekly radio address a new federal regulation requiring warning labels on containers of fruit and vegetable juices that have not been pasteurized. After that initiative, Clinton will take executive actions later in the week that are intended to increase the federal government's role in health care and the issue of juvenile crime, according to a report from the Los Angeles Times. While not as sweeping as some of other recent executive orders issued with little fanfare and reported exclusively by WorldNet Daily, Clinton's new proposals are intended to send a signal to Congress that he does not fancy himself a lame duck as he approaches the midway point of his second term. He's ready to work with Congress if they will work with him, says Rahm Emanuel, but if they choose partisanship, he will choose progress, said the senior policy advisor to the president. So in other words, the president is going to bypass Congress, Fred, which is supposed to pass bills and deliver them to the president to either sign or veto. Clinton doesn't even care now if you deliver them to his desk to veto. He says he's going to govern by executive orders. So by a stroke of an ink pen, he can institute laws that the Congress has not even dealt with.
It's about time we got rid of them.
And that's why some people say it's unconstitutional. Well, another thing that was declared unconstitutional was the veto given to the president. It was giving the president too much power. And so that was struck down by the Supreme Court a few days ago. So the power to issue executive orders, Fred, was intended to give presidents rule-making authority over the executive branch only. So you got the legislative branch, the judicial branch, where your Supreme Court is, the legislative is where the House and Senate is, and the executive branch is the president's branch. That's why we have a three-pronged government in this country. And they're supposed to be separate. And they kind of have a checks and balance against each other. Well, Clinton now is kind of stealing some of the power of Congress by sending out these executive orders that have more to do than just with the executive branch. But some, like Clinton, have used it instead for sweeping public policy decisions. While some constitutional scholars question this use, Congress has not batted an eye over Clinton's recent actions, including Executive Order 13083, which overrode an earlier order by President Reagan reaffirming the 10th Amendment powers of states and the rights of individuals. So Clinton is changing the 10th Amendment now.
Yes.
Now that's something in the Constitution, and he's starting to mess with that. So Clinton's order issued May 14th and reported in WorldNet Daily last month lists 9 exceptions under which the powers of the states and people could be abrogated by the federal government in direct conflict with the 10th Amendment. So this executive order of May 14th, Fred, is in direct violation of the 10th Amendment by Clinton using an executive order to put it into law. No member of Congress took exception to the order during the first 30-day comment period during which the House and Senate had the power to overrule it, Fred. So the House and Senate approved of him issuing this executive order that tramples on the 10th Amendment. So what do you think about that, Fred?
Not good.
Not good. All right, well, we'll have to take another caller. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air. Hello? Hello? All right, well, we sometimes you'll have to wait a few minutes till we deal with an issue at hand, and then we'll get right to you. We don't want to cut you off or anything. Okay, another issue, Fred, that we brought up here when it first happened was the death of James McDougal. You know, his wife, or ex-wife, just recently was freed from prison. Clinton now is some of these judges that Clinton has appointed over the last few years are now starting to come into play here, and they're like Webb Hubbell's. There was a lawsuit filed by Kenneth Starr, against Webb Hubbell on tax evasion. One of Clinton's appointed judges just threw that out a couple of days ago. But James McDougal was one of the key players in the original Whitewater charges, and those charges are still ongoing. Kenneth Starr hopefully eventually is going to come to a conclusion on all this stuff, but James McDougal ended up in prison over all of this stuff. He was a very close friend of the Clintons. Him and his former wife, Susan McDougal, were drinking buddies and party buddies with the Clintons when they were governor down there in Arkansas. Well, James McDougal turned up dead here while he was serving his time in prison in a federal medical center, and prison officials withheld crucial heart medication from key Whitewater witness James McDougal just hours before he suffered cardiac arrest and died, according to new inmate accounts obtained by the Washington Weekly. And this article is by Carl Limbacher, And when McDougal collapsed in distress, guards at the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth were within earshot, but took no immediate action, these same sources allege. By one account, medical staff did not attend to McDougal till nearly an hour after the guards first noticed his emergency. The written accounts by McDougal's fellow prisoners were provided Thursday by Boston Globe reporter Curtis Wilkie after a lengthy interview based on his McDougal biography. Arkansas Mischief, the birth of a national scandal. So McDougal also had a book coming out just a few days after he died. That book was on the book stands, but he died before it hit the stands. Mr. Wilkie agreed to share the inmates' letters only after concealing their identities, but the authors' names are known to him. Wilkie told the Washington Weekly that he does not suspect foul play in McDougal's death, but he added, if there's something there that needs to be exposed, I hope it gets exposed. In that spirit, he graciously agreed to make the potentially explosive account public. The more detail of the two letters is lengthy, but because of the sensitive nature of the subject matter, the Washington Weekly reprints the text here in verbatim form, with only passages that might reveal the author's identity deleted. So anyway, we'll paraphrase what this one inmate says is, let's see, I've talked to a number of inmates concerning his death. I've written to a couple of publications. Jim's death might have been natural, but there are a suspicious number of coincidences, and at the very least, the prison was neglectful. This was at least his second summons to take a urinalysis test. After the first one, he told me his medication wouldn't allow him to go to the bathroom on demand. He told his doctor, and the doctor noted it in his medical file. Therefore, he shouldn't have been tested or thrown in the hole. So Jim McDougal was thrown in the prison hole. That's where you punish people that don't go by prison rules. And so he couldn't urinate for a urinalysis, so they threw him in the hole, thinking that he was trying to avoid detection of some illegal drug. So once he was in the hole, he requested his heart medication, and he was repeatedly denied his medication. And the staff in the hole is required to make a visual check on all of the hole inmates every half hour. They did not do this, but instead they played cards less than 10 minutes from Jim, or 10 feet from Jim's cell. After it was discovered that Jim was sick, the staff waited 10 more minutes to open his cell. The medical staff arrived some 45 minutes later. This prison is called a medical center. Sick or terminal inmates from around the system are sent here because of better medical treatment than where they're at. There are 5 units, and of those 5, 2 are for the most serious cases. This prisoner says Jim and I both lived in one of the 2 at Fort Worth. On our units, the more serious cases like Jim live on the ground floor. Further, Jim was on a list of about 20 inmates who were checked up on every hour by a qualified person. Qualified as in life-saving techniques.
You hear me all right? Testing 1.
So the guy was saying, my point is that Jim was treated with kid gloves. He had definite medical problems, which were severe, and yet he was thrown in the hole. We have a mini hospital on the grounds here. It houses inmates that are recovering from surgery or very ill people. It also has its own hole, specifically for the sick or people that need monitoring that act up. These inmates are watched 24 hours a day, and this prisoner asked, why wasn't Jim just placed in the hospital hole instead of removed from there and placed in the regular inmates punishment center?
Yeah, the telephone call.
After Jim's body was removed from his cell, the officers were sitting around a desk card table. A couple of guys in suits came in and told the jailers to fill out reports, even to go as far as to tell them that they should write down that they checked on Jim every half hour, when in fact they didn't. Okay, Freddie boy. There was one twist here. It says that this other prisoner gave his name. His name is T.J. Lowe. He added a new wrinkle to the whole situation. He says that McDougal's jailers may have had cover-up in mind as soon as the body was whisked away. Lowe reports on what happened after they removed Jim's body. An inmate is taken out of his cell. He's told to mop. An inmate was taken out of his cell, and he's told to go in and mop and scrub and paint McDougal's cell and do it immediately. This is never done here, never when an inmate dies. It might be swept a couple of days later, probably not usually. This time it got scrubbed and painted within the hour. This prisoner's asking why they went in and scrubbed and painted and swept McDougal's cell right after he died. When any other prisoner dies, it's several days before they do anything, and then they only sweep up the floor.
Yes.
So there could be a little bit of fire weather smoke, Fred. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Moo diddles to you, Mr. Callman.
All right.
I don't know if this is on the subject that you're talking about. You're talking about executive order
Yeah.
and how President Clinton rules.
Uh-huh.
A year ago, he gave an executive order on how to give the state of New York $400 million to not trained doctors.
He did.
Yeah, they did. And a couple months ago, I saw a report on NBC Nightly News about the state of doctors in New York, and they were complaining that they had to work all this overtime because there's a shortage of doctors. President Clinton said at the time that there was a glut. I just want to say our tax dollars hard at work. And by the way, Clinton said at the time that it was successful. He wants to.
Oh.
Uh,
In getting rid of doctors?
he thinks there's a doctor glut.
Huh.
So I don't know.
Well, it could be part of his socialized medicine program where he wants to control where you go to a doctor and which doctor you see. So if they get rid of some of the doctors, then they'll be able to control the ones that are left a little closer.
He'd like to control our lives from the day we get up in the morning till, I don't know, I just don't like the guy. I don't know how that bonehead got elected.
Well, that's what happens when you have a communist in office or a socialist. They like big centralized government where they control everything, and all the directives come from the centralized government out to the hinterlands, like places like Eau Claire or Chicago or Los Angeles, but all of the orders come from the centralized government back in Washington. On the other hand, the Republicans for years have been pushing for decentralizing government, giving power back to the states and local governments, and all of a sudden when you talk about doing that, then all of a sudden people get up in arms and say you're a racist and go off on all kinds of tangents.
Cruel and insensitive.
When all you're talking about is states' rights, and the Constitution has states' rights built right in it. There's a separation of the federal government from the state governments.
Well, I think the American public have better educate themselves about our political system before we don't have one anymore.
That's right. Well, thanks a lot for calling in.
Yep.
We appreciate it. Okay, we got Mr. Mars himself, Norbert Wilson. And Norbert, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chuck.
Okay, his mic, I don't know if his mic's going over the air, but it's okay. Well, Norbert, what's happening with the Japanese? I hear they got a spaceship that's going around the moon right now.
Well, I don't know that it's going around the moon, but it was launched on the 4th of July, and it's going around the Earth. It'll be going around the Earth for 5 months, and then they'll push off from the orbit around Earth for Mars.
Yeah, well, now, is the United States sending up a probe to Mars here again pretty soon?
The Japanese launch on the 4th of July included the countries of Germany, of Canada, and the United States. They all had experiments on board the Japanese launch on the 4th of July, and they included about a total of 14 experiments, and these are all experiments for an orbit around the planet Mars. They're still looking for signs of life on Mars.
The Japanese are up there looking for life. Well, you know, Norbert, back to 1969 when we put a man on the moon. The song's been wrote about it, and it was a pretty big deal. But here, 30 years later, we got nothing going, and we've destroyed all of the launch vehicles that can get us to the moon. So what's the United States going to do? We've been kind of screwing around, sending up these shuttles for the last 20 years, and we've kind of given up on going to other planets. Now we don't have the equipment to do it. At one time, we had the launch vehicles that could send a satellite or send a crew to the moon or to Mars, but we don't have them anymore. To start now to build those, it would take hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, how come they dismantled that capability?
Well, I think they thought their priority should change to International Space Station, and they've been going at it seriously since STS 78 of 1996.
So all we ended up with then was that Russian space station up there that's a basket case. It's falling apart. And that's all both countries have been able to do in the last 20 years, is that dinky little space station up there that it's antique.
This is true. They intend to get seriously started sometime about 1999 in the third quarter of the third quarter of 1999. They seriously plan to have something up there for the International Space Station.
Okay, Norbert, from your studies and your scientific knowledge, in your own personal opinion, is there life on Mars?
That seems to be a real die-hard research topic, and there's still a lot of open possibilities that a person can't deny one way or the other. So things have to go on looking for life on Mars.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Norbert, Mr. NASA, Wilson, thanks a lot for your commentary tonight, Norbert. We'll see you on the show next time. All right. Well, Freddie boy, we're going to take a call, and then we've got to talk about your next thing there. So you got it ready?
Yes.
Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm calling about, you were talking about the school system here in Eau Claire earlier. I'm calling, I have a daughter that was considered, she's an excellent student. I think the school system in this town needs a little work on working with some of the excelled students.
You mean they're holding back the good students?
Yes.
Or the smart ones, or
the smart ones, yes. I know a lot of the ADA or like or special learning students need a lot of help, but my daughter needs a lot of help too. She's advanced. Sometimes she don't even want to go to school because she hates going to school so bad.
Well, there are some excellent books on talking about the dumbing down of America's students, and the public school systems are set up on a socialist base where everyone should be equal. And so in this equalization program that has been in play now for about 20, 30 years, it's part of the Great Society and the big socialist programs of the early 60s that we're still trying to flush out of our system and get on with creating a super society. We've got to get rid of all that junk from the 60s that Kennedy and Johnson came up with. And before that, Roosevelt. We've come to a situation now where we have these public schools that steal all the tax money. There's no money. There's no tax money left over for the private schools to experiment and to excel. So what we have now is a mediocre public school system that's based on everyone being equal, and which dumbs down the brightest and the best, and that's why they're bored.
Yeah, that's and a parent like myself that can't afford to send their child to a good private school where they'd get taught.
Well, Tommy Thompson's opening up the door to that when he signed into law the voucher system down in Milwaukee. Now that's going to come into play with people suing to say, hey, if they can do it in Milwaukee, I want to do it in Eau Claire, and we're going to start breaking this thing open to where we can get some of that tax money that's hoarded by the public school system here. 99% of it goes into the local school system, and they do with it whatever they want, including giving themselves $100,000 a year, and $120,000, and $90,000, and having a bloated bureaucracy at the top of the local school system that doesn't teach one student. All they do is argue about who's going to go play golf that afternoon, or fight over who's going to have 3 weeks vacation versus 4 weeks. And they're not teaching our youth, but they're taking a lot of that money and pumping it into a mediocre public school system. We need to have experimentation and handing out grants. They should be in the forefront. They should be the leaders in pushing for the best and the brightest, but they're not doing it. So unfortunately, we're going to have to take them screaming and dragging and pushing them into the 21st century. And if they can't produce, take the money away from them and let the public school system collapse and go to private schools.
Yeah, and the other subject I was going to talk to you about is you're talking about the Clinton administration. Well, I'm kind of concerned about the city council administration here in town. I have a friend that's renting from one of the city councilmen that hasn't had things fixed, and he was elected to the city council. And you're talking about Clinton ruining the country, what about some of these private or local elected officials not doing their jobs either?
Well, the slumlords are everywhere. They're in New York City. Fred fought the slumlords back in the 50s and 60s in New York, and they had to go into the streets with axe handles, and they drove them out of town. And they got rent control now to where people have luxury apartments that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thanks to Fred, they're only paying $59 a year. And so anyway, you're going to have slumlords everywhere. And I've heard rumors that we have some slumlords on the city council. But we're doing an investigative report on that. We're not ready to roll with it yet, but we are investigating some of the really tacky apartments in town. And I know that they've got some nasty apartments in this town. I went out looking in the early 90s for an apartment before I bought a mobile home. And for $400 back in the early 90s, I mean, there was some major dumps in this town. And I can imagine that it hasn't got much better 5 years later. And so we're looking into that situation, and if we got slumlords on the city council, maybe they need to be exposed. But we can't name any names yet till we get some facts and figures. We're kind of like Kenneth Starr. We're trying to get our information together and our proof before we go public. But we'll investigate that. So thanks for calling in.
All right, thanks.
Okay. I know, Fred, you fought those guys out there with axe handles. You told me you went into one of their meetings and turned over the tables and ran them commies out of town.
Yeah,
Tell the story again.
I did, yeah.
How many of you guys went in there that time and chased them out?
I don't remember, but there was a number of them.
That's the way you show them commies. If we'd have had the axe handles, we could have came down here to public access when they chased our show up here that day for the Communist Youth League meeting they had here. We could have ran them out of here with axe handles. We could have got Roy Rogers Hoff and a few others, Common and you, and we'd come down here and chase them out of here. Send them back to Russia where they belong. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, would you guys like to report on the Monica Lewinsky case tonight, or no?
What happened to her now?
No, I just I'd like your take on the idea.
Well, she's going to probably get filthy rich. She's probably going to end up in Playboy. And nothing's going to happen to Clinton over that. There's bigger fish to fry. And I keep saying that's a rabbit trail. The whole Monica Lewinsky thing is a rabbit trail. It's going to drag on and on and on until Clinton leaves office. Evidently, his wife doesn't care if he goes around chasing all these younger women and having sex with them. He did it down in Arkansas for years, right underneath Hillary's nose. Kind of makes you wonder what Hillary's doing, because she knows what he's doing. But the Monica Lewinsky thing, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Maybe the cover-up of it later brought down, as in with the case of Nixon, him covering up a very minor, insignificant little break-in, and the covering up of that afterwards brought down the presidency of Nixon. Now, the cover-up of this Lewinsky thing could be the real constitutional crisis, and the problem in Washington be the covering up of that by Clinton's buddies and trying to get her a job and stuff. But as far as what was going on between the two of them in his Oval Office or whatever, that stuff's probably been going on ever since there's been a White House. What do you think about it, Fred?
I agree with you.
All right. That answer your question? Okay. Well, Freddie boy, Jane Fonda's up to it again. She's attacking Christians now, saying they're not like other people. I couldn't believe it when I read this here. Something about that, I don't know, but this Jane Fonda, she got herself in trouble during the Vietnam War when she hopped up on top of sat in a chair of an anti-aircraft gun that was pointed up at the sky, pointed at American jets that were flying over Hanoi. And she hopped in one and pretended like she was shooting down American jets. And that stuck with her for about 30 years now, but now her and her husband Ted are going after Christians and doing some Christian bashing here. And she's going to get herself in trouble with the big guy upstairs, Fred. It's about a 4-page article here, and I don't have enough time to read it, so we'll bring it up on the next show. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
How you doing, Chuck?
All right.
Watching your program again this evening. You know, it never ceases to amaze me a couple people that have a problem with things in Eau Claire and it doesn't go their way. They just want to be negative and try to attack someone that
that is basically, you know, in the business to try to do something and try to provide, you know, a good environment. But, you know, I'm probably the city council person she's talking about. Miss Tappan needs to get a life. I'm doing all I can working with the city county health department and a number of other Gestapo-type police organizations out there checking my garbage cans and checking the length of my lawns. These people need to get a life. Step up to the plate or shut up. Okay? That's Jane Tappan, Bernie Trattin, and all these other people. You know, I was elected, that's right. I'll do the job. I'll mind my business. Why don't these people mind their own? She doesn't have any friends, let alone friends that rent from me.
So anyway, you're saying that the city has so much red tape and stuff to jump through, it's hard to be a landlord in this town?
Well, it's difficult, yes. There are people that are concerned about garbage cans on the front lawn, length of lawns, regulations to do with building and building codes and fire codes. And then you've also have the type of people that we have in town that don't take care of the property, that also make it hard for me to maintain a property. And not just me, a lot of other people. But I happen to be the one that stepped up to the plate, worked hard to get elected, got elected, and going to continue to do the job besides these negative people. Put up or shut up. Step up to the plate, put your name on a ballot, or get out of my life. That's all you got to do. Mind your own business.
Yes.
Well, thanks for your opinion there. I didn't...
Keep up the good work.
Okay. Well, there you have it, Fred.
Yes.
Live from one of the city council members. I wasn't even thinking about that city council member. I was thinking about a whole different person. But
Yes, so was I.
well, anyway, we want to thank you all for tuning in to the Cow Report tonight. I've been your host, Chuck Lee, with my rusty, trusty sidekick, Fred the True Stafford, and the director and pyrotechnical engineer, Roy Rogers Hoff. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you right here next time on the Old Cow Report. Adios, amigos
Yes.
and amigettes.